International Church's third installment of our nutrition series. I'm Kavalya Fletcher, and my personal nutrition coaching business is called Wellth, and we have partnered with City of Hope to give you some nutrition information. Now, this is an introduction to nutrition. This isn't all you'll ever need to know about nutrition, but it's really supposed to get you to start thinking about or start being a citizen scientist, so to speak. You trying to find the answers to some of your plaguing questions as it relates to nutrition, your health, your weight, so on and so forth. So our goal is to provide context to a lot of conflicting information that you see online. We're just trying to provide the context that circulates around. So welcome online, welcome to everybody in the house. This week we are talking about what makes us sick. And last week we talked about what makes us fat. Now, I don't believe that we are fat. I believe that we carry body fat. We're not it. It's just on us. So we talked about that last week. And, after these sessions, I get a lot of questions that come through. And I'm going to tackle a few of those questions before we get into what makes us sick. But a disclosure moment, I am not a medical doctor. A lot of the information that I get is through my many nutrition certifications as well as books that I read with continuing education from medical doctors. And I'll show you some today. But let's get into some of the questions that came about from last week's session, what makes us fat. Well, first of all, before we get into that, how many had an amazing Easter? And did you eat all the things? Because Easter is a holiday where we are prompted to eat all kinds of things that we wouldn't normally eat, probably, and so a lot of dietary indiscretions usually come during a holiday, and this is no different. I always ask the question: what does the Cadbury bunny have to do with resurrection? It has absolutely nothing to do with it, but it's one of those things that, I think our society, our government has introduced holidays as a way to celebrate. And when we celebrate, we do what? We eat more. And when we eat more, a lot of people profit from that. So that was one of the questions that came up after last week's episode, which is, what do I do for Easter? Should I indulge for Easter? What should I do during holidays? And I was like, well, there's always a holiday. It seems like every few weeks there's a holiday. We're celebrating something. It's Admin Professionals Day, or it's Easter, and then Mother's Day is coming up, and then Memorial Day is literally in the same month, and on and on and on. And so we have created so many holidays. Our government has created so many holidays, times for us to celebrate. And with celebration comes us eating out, eating more, eating things that we maybe normally wouldn't eat. We indulge. And so we have dietary indiscretions, and they kind of look like this. The Cadbury cream egg and the Peeps, like those we have associations with food and holidays. Associations with food and holidays are a huge thing in the United States. And so linking food to events seems to be a way that we are wired, that we're conditioned to eat certain things. And that's really important for us to note, because when we're linking, not only do we link events to food, or food to events, rather, we also link foods to emotions. So, emotions and decision making. So like happy hour, we go out to happy hour and we have drinks and we have appetizers and we have all those things. So we're really good at linking a mood or a holiday or a celebratory event to food. And I wanted to share this book with you because it's by medical doctor Robert Lustig. He wrote the book, The Hacking of the American Mind, and it is a fascinating book about how Americans, our government essentially, has really hacked us in trained us and programmed us to celebrate all of these holidays and how that impacts our health. It's an ongoing thing. We're always celebrating something. So yeah, if you're interested in that kind of thing, if you're interested in that theory, the theory behind how we associate foods and emotions and decision making and events, check out that book. So my house did experience a lot of dietary indiscretions because I have children and they're eating all the candy and all of that kind of stuff. So that is a thing. And what happens is whenever you consume those foods, you're triggered to eat more of those foods. So it ends up being not just that day, but it ends up being multiple days following that you're continuing to eat those foods because they are addicting. So since they are addicting, I wanted to show this to you because I read this book called Salt, Sugar, and Fat. And it's written by someone who exited the food industry and then wrote about the food industry and the big food companies, you know, your big name food companies, your Kraft, your Nestle, all the big food companies. There's about 10 of them, and 10 major ones. And he was writing about how they have exploited our brain chemistry by engineering certain foods to be addictive. And so here are 3 types of foods, and chips, donuts, candy bar, 3 types of foods that we consume that are addictive, and here's why, the components of the food. So we live in a world where food chemists make foods addictive for more consumption. They utilize a technique called the bliss point, a technique called achieving the bliss point. And this technique involves combining fat, sugar, and salt in just the right ratios so the food literally becomes nearly impossible to stop consuming. And how many of us have eaten chips and we eat another bag and another bag? And it's just, you don't get full. And remember from last week, we were talking about satiety hormones, and we don't have satiety hormones for fake food. We don't have built-in hormones for things that are man-made, that aren't natural. So you just keep eating and eating. So foods like this, it should be noted, are only made in labs. They're not found in nature. So food chemists, they use the sugar, the salt, and the fat. And food manufacturers nearly always make sure that at least two of these ingredients are in their foods. So it's either with the chips, salt and fat, donut, sugar and fat, candy bar, sugar and fat. So at least 2 of these, and this is the book that I'm showing you that's giving all this information. So 2 of these ingredients in their foods. The problem is that these salt, sugar, and fat are engineered to be more addictive. They're engineered to be more addictive. The book talks about how the big food companies, they have research labs, and they literally harvest human taste buds to test different products to see what the response would be in terms of the mouthfeel and all of that, the foods that they're testing out. And then they analyze human brain chemistry when we consume certain products. So how much does it stimulate our dopamine or serotonin? They test out all of these things. So essentially what they're trying to do is take the decision away from us. Because if they can kind of hijack our brain chemistry and exploit it, then they profit. They profit, but we don't. So this is a very good book. If you're interested in that kind of thing, dive into that book. So when we're talking about those 3 ingredients, the salt, the fat, the sugar, most people would say, well, yeah, we understand that that sugar is no good. But fat, you said, was a macronutrient that was essential. So what about that? But remember, we talked about the toxic, highly processed fats. That's what we're talking about here. We're talking about the toxic, highly processed fats. We're talking about your canola oil, your soybean oil, your vegetable oil. We're talking about those fats. It takes about 2,000 chemicals to produce those kinds of fats. 2,000 chemicals to produce that. And you're putting that in your body when you consume these things. And they're laced with all kinds of addictive properties. They're laced with them. But salt, some people ask about salt. Well, is salt inherently bad? No, it's not. Are you eating the right salts? So, like iodized salt, for instance, that's table salt, highly chemicalized salt. It also has dextrose in it, which is a sugar. So they've added sugar to the salt to make it even more addictive, right? So, well, what kind of salt can we eat? Well, your natural salts, so like your sea salts, are better for you to consume. So a lot of when we go to the grocery store, we'll notice that a lot of our foods will be marketed in a particular way for us. And it'll say sugar-free or low sodium or low fat or fat-free. And what does that translate to? Because it translates to something. So I'm showing you some nutrition facts here, and just for those that aren't familiar with reading nutrition facts, we're looking at the ingredients on these lists. So the first ingredient on the list of ingredients of a product, that's the ingredient that is most prominent in the product. So for let's say this ranch dressing, the first ingredient is water. The second ingredient is buttermilk. The third ingredient is corn syrup, which is sugar. It's straight sugar, and it's highly processed, highly toxic sugar. And maltodextrin, more sugar. And you got to watch out for all of these words that you can't pronounce. That's why it's best to eat foods, natural foods, than to consume things that are highly processed, because you'll be reading this and you have no idea what that is, and you think it's good for you, and it's not. So what do the food companies do? What do they do to get us to try to swindle us over to eat a particular product? They just change the labeling. So let's look at this ranch dressing, for instance. So fat-free ranch, you've swapped the fat out, but what'd you put in its place? I just told you. It's water, buttermilk, corn syrup, maltodextrin, the first ingredients. So lots of syrup got swapped out. So you told me that it was fat-free, but you added sugar, because somehow you're going to have to get some taste, some flavor, right? So they take out the fat, they remove the fat, and they put in sugar instead. What about for low sodium? So if you look at this Hillshire Farms low sodium deli slices, which by the way are highly processed, but if you look at that, it says low sodium on it. But here's the thing. If you look way at the bottom, it says sodium has been reduced from 500 milligrams to 340 milligrams per serving. What does that mean to us? It means absolutely nothing. Nobody knows how much salt you're supposed to take in a day. So that means absolutely nothing to us. But what you should see in that is that, oh, wow, it's been reduced by 160 milligrams. Oh, that's got to be better than, the regular version, the regular version of the deli meat. But is it? No, because if you understand how nutrition works and how the food industry works, they reduce the amount of sodium that they put in it. But what they do is they increase the concentration of the salt. So it's more concentrated. So you can use less, and therefore they can market it as lower sodium. But it's still very intense and concentrated. What about this zero sugar Coca-Cola? The zero sugar Coca-Cola, well, they're not going to put fat in that, right? And they're not going to put salt in that to make it sweeter. So what do they put instead? Well, they put artificial sweeteners. So artificial sweeteners that are man-made. And what do those look like? So you see here that aspartame is in here. It says sweeteners, aspartame. So aspartame converts to formaldehyde in your body. Formaldehyde is used in the manufacturing of ink. So you've taken essentially something that was sweetened with cane sugar, and you have now swapped it out for something that's way more toxic than cane sugar is. But this is how we're being marketed to. This is how we're being marketed to. So decoding that marketing and understanding what you're consuming, that's why it's just easier to stay away from packaged foods, because there's bound to be something in it that isn't healthy for us. We are being targeted. It's all about the taste. They tackle our taste buds first, right? With the salt, fat, and sugar that you saw on the last slide. They tackle our taste buds. They make it more convenient to get it, right? There's more. If you stop by a gas station, there's more packaged products there than there are, fruits and vegetables. Obviously, it's convenient, it's fast, it's pick it up and go, and then the cost. It's cheaper. It's cheaper to buy. Ranch dressing and then instead of vegetables and just having vegetables. So organic vegetables, by the way. So yes, I wanted to tackle some of those things as it relates to Easter and how we kind of get hooked by the food industry into eating and consuming certain things that aren't healthy for us. But then this weekend, somebody said to me here at church, actually, they said to me, well, what about fruit? What about fruit? Can I eat fruit? Because that's healthy, that's natural. And since we're still in the conversation about what makes us fat, we're transitioning here. Since we're still having that conversation, we're speaking of foods that aren't made in labs, right? They're found in nature, right? We would all agree that watermelon's found in nature, yes. It's found in nature, but it did have some help in the lab. What you're looking at right now is how a banana used to look ages ago in the 1600s and how a banana looks now. Notice that there are seeds in that banana. And then on the other side, you see a watermelon, how it used to look hundreds of years ago and how it looks now. And so what's the difference? Well, one, fruit is genetically modified. If you remove the seeds, how does it grow? If you've removed the seeds, then you've genetically modified it to grow without seeds. That's how plants grow, is with seeds. You plant the seeds in the ground, they grow, you have harvest. But if it's seedless, then obviously it's been genetically modified, and it has been modified so that it can grow without the seeding process. So that's A. And not only has it been genetically modified, but it's substantially sweeter than hundreds of years ago. So people think that fruit is a good substitute for sugar, for other sugars. And while I don't agree with it, because one, of the insulin response, which we talked about last week, it still produces an insulinogenic response. And two, because it's genetically modified. It's genetically modified, similar to how some of those toxic chemicals that are in your fats or that are in the aspartame, that's, the sugar, the artificial sweetener, it's made in a lab. So, and I know it hurts people to hear that. It's like, oh, but I love fruit, and how can I still want to keep fruit in my diet. Okay, eating the lower glycemic fruits are going to be more helpful to you. So eating berries, like your blueberries, raspberries, strawberries, are lower on the glycemic index. And okay, so people that don't know what the glycemic index is. The glycemic index is, it shows you the glucose response whenever you consume a particular food. So whatever that glucose response is from consuming bananas or watermelon, that's what the glycemic index shows you, is what the glucose response is. But more important, equally as important, I'll say equally as important as the glycemic index is the insulin index, which nobody seems to talk about, because there are some foods that aren't healthy for you that are on the glycemic index as low. They have low glycemic response, but they have high insulin response. And what's important here, because insulin, again, is the fat storage hormone, so insulin is going to be very important. So looking at both the insulin index and the glycemic index and saying, okay, this is a food that I probably shouldn't consume because it's going to spike my insulin like crazy, and then and then I'm going to be storing. I'm going to be storing. I'm going to be storing. So that's that with the fruit. Sorry. So berries are going to be your best bet because they're lower glycemic. But if you're trying to lose weight, you're going to want to keep you're going to want to keep the berries out too. So that's what's happening with fruit. So to the person who asked me here at the church this weekend if fruit was fine, no, not if you're trying to lose weight. So, but he was asking me about the calories. He was asking me about the calorie content. And I immediately stopped him and I said, it has absolutely nothing to do with calories. I don't talk about calories, especially when you're overweight or obese, because that means that you have a hormonal dysregulation. So we can't talk about a caloric dysregulation or imbalance if there's a hormonal one, because that's first and foremost that we need to regulate. But he's asking this question because we're constantly pumped full of this information about, the calories, oh, that's low in calories, eat that. If you go to a restaurant and you see a menu, it shows you the calorie count. It doesn't show you how much sugar is in a particular item. And so that's a part of the food industry play, which is if I can just keep the conversation about calories, then I can equate all foods, and then, a Snickers bar is the same as a piece of salmon. And how many people, if you had a choice and you knew that it was going to have the same effect, how many people would choose the Snickers? Yeah, we don't choose the Snickers bar. So that's the situation. It's not about the calories. It's about the hormonal response. Last week we talked about the hormones, leptin, insulin, and ghrelin. We talked about those the most. There are other hormones that come into play, but we talked about those three. We're going to dive in more to the insulin today and unpack that, but just as a refresher. We talked about leptin, how that's a hormone that comes from your body fat, and it signals to your brain to, hey, if your fat cells are full, it says, hey, brain, I'm not hungry. If your fat cells are empty, it says, hey, brain, I am hungry. Let's get some food. Insulin is released by the pancreas in response to carbohydrates that are eaten, and it tells your body to store. It's the storage hormone. Ghrelin is a hormone that's released from your stomach. Whenever your stomach is stretched out, then it says, hey, brain, we're full. If your stomach is not stretched out, then it says, hey, let's eat. And I get this question all the time from people that have had bariatric surgery where they get their stomach, reduced in size, and they lose weight. They do absolutely lose weight, but they feel like they can continue to eat however they want just because they're losing weight, and that's not the case, because what that surgery did for you is that it shrunk your stomach, but it didn't change the rest of your hormones. So it didn't change your hormones at all. So you're still having that hormonal dysregulation happening, and you have to regulate that in conjunction with that bariatric surgery. You have to change the way you eat, or you'll gain all the weight back that you lost from that surgery. So now that we've talked about, we've added on to what makes us fat. We've added on to last week's session because of some of the questions that people pinged me with. Let's now dive into what makes us sick. What makes us sick? So we're gonna start with what makes us sick as it relates to blood sugar. So a normal blood sugar is about 100 milligrams per deciliter, times about the 5 liters of blood that exists in your body. And so what is considered normal, that equates to about 1 teaspoon of sugar in your blood. Anything in excess of that is considered toxic, and your body has prompts and triggers to take that excess sugar and move it out and dispose of it in your cells away from its organs, right? Away from the important stuff. So how does it do this? It does this via insulin. Remember, the storage hormone. It takes the excess sugar, stores it, disposes of it, really, out of the bloodstream, to get it out of the bloodstream, because anything in excess of a teaspoon is considered toxic. So your body goes into an emergency state, and it says, hey, get this stuff out. It's not good for me. So what does that look like? Because a lot of people tell me that, I was eating healthy carbs. I was eating healthy sugar. Well, sugar is sugar. It gets converted the same in the body, with the exception of fructose, which we talked about last week. Fructose gets metabolized solely by the liver. We'll talk about that more. But okay, we're looking at, if we're equating all foods, right? Then a 12-ounce Coke is 39 grams of sugar, carbohydrates, and 1 cup of brown rice is 45 grams of carbohydrates. What does that equate to? So 8 teaspoons of sugar for the Coke, 9 teaspoons of sugar for the rice. This is what we're consuming. Now, granted, is it better to have something that's more of a natural food than a toxic, chemicalized, highly processed food like, Coke? Yes. But in the grand scheme of things, when it comes to how your body is processing that sugar, it's saying teaspoons of sugar and teaspoons of sugar. It's not saying anything about the fact that one's really toxic and one's more natural. So that's that. 9 teaspoons of sugar for the brown rice and 8 teaspoons of sugar for the Coke. Remember, 1 teaspoon of sugar in your bloodstream is considered normal. So what happens? What happens when you consume that rice? Remember, if you think about last week, we have a capacity for sugar. Remember, about 100 grams in our liver, we have a capacity for. With that rice, we're butting up against just 1 cup. And how many of us just eat 1 cup? But 1 cup of rice, we're butting up against, we're halfway there. We're halfway there to our maximum capacity of glycogen storage, sugar storage, with just 1 cup of brown rice. And so how does it work as it relates to insulin? Insulin, again, is the storage hormone. And when it's released, when blood glucose, when blood sugar is high, and it stores it as fuel for later use in the liver, the muscle, and fat. And so there are capacities for all those, except for the fat. There's unlimited amount of capacity. So what does it do? This graphic shows that insulin is like a key that unlocks a door. So insulin kind of knocks on the door of the cells and says, hey, this is toxic in the bloodstream. I need to get that into the cells away from, the bloodstream. So it knocks on the door and in goes the glucose. That's how it works. But what happens when the cells are full? We mentioned last week that there is a storage capacity for sugar. So the pancreas releases insulin in response to sugar being consumed. You have 100 grams of storage in your liver, 300 to 500 grams of storage in your muscle, and then you have unlimited in your fat. So let's scratch out muscle, because you can only use the sugar, the glycogen storage. You can only use the glycogen stores for your muscle through exercising. You actually have to use the muscle in order to burn that glycogen storage. You have to use the muscle. And many of us aren't working out. So just scratch that. Let's just say it's maxed out, it's at capacity, it's full. So now you're only working with 100 grams of storage in the liver, and then anything else is going to roll over into body fat. That's significant. And I showed you last week all the things that a standard American diet consumes, and it was about 341 or so grams of carbohydrates, sugar in one day. And so you filled up the liver, and then it rolled over into fat, like 240 grams of it rolled over into fat. And then we do that day after day after day after day after day, and then we have a problem. The liver it has so many other functions than to process our overconsumption. It has so many other functions: filtration, digestion, metabolism, detoxification, protein synthesis, which means building protein, storage of vitamins and minerals. It has so many other functions than dealing with what we're overeating. So what does the bloodstream look like normally? This is a nice, peaceful environment, right? This is considered normal. So we said that one of insulin's main job is to move the glucose from the bloodstream into the cells so that it can be used for energy. This is what's happening. The orange blobs are glucose. That's your sugar that's coming in. You ate, let's say, a donut, and this is your sugar coming in. The insulin gets released from the pancreas and just knocks on the door of the cells, lets that sugar right on in. But what happens when you do it over and over and over again for years and years and years? You're eating the standard American diet of 341 grams of sugar per day. Every day, your cells get full. So these frequent meals and a lot of carbs get in the bloodstream. More insulin is needed to shuttle it into the bloodstream, but full cells won't open. So if the cells are full, you've knocked on the door, insulin's knocked on the door, and it said, I need to dispose of this stuff. It's toxic in the bloodstream. Remember, only a teaspoon is normal. I need to get rid of this. And the cells are like, we're full. I don't know what to tell you. We're full. So normal amounts of insulin are not able to move glucose into the cells, which means there's a buildup of glucose in the blood, which also means there's a buildup of insulin in the blood. And remember, if insulin is present, what does that mean? You've turned on the switch and you've said, we're storing. We're in storage mode. So you stay in storage mode all day, even when you're not eating, because of the abuse of the system over years. This isn't, you do this, a week in a row and this is the result. No, this is years of, abusing this system. So to compensate, the body must produce, so when there's a lot of sugar, the body must produce extra insulin to try to force the insulin in. This leads to constant high levels of insulin, which blocks fat burning, because remember, it's a switch. You're either storing or you're burning. If you're storing, you're not burning. It's a switch. So the way to successfully break so essentially, your cells have become resistant to insulin disposing of the sugar. They're resistant to it. They're not doing it. So the way to successfully break the insulin resistance cycle is not continually increase the insulin, because that's what they do. As a diabetic, which I know a ton of diabetics, as a diabetic, they just give you more insulin. It's like, well, insulin's the problem. Insulin's the problem, and my high insulin is the problem, and my high sugar is the problem. Why are we giving me more insulin? What we know is that this is a dietary disease, because how else do you get sugar in the bloodstream other than consuming sugar? So all you have to do is kind of, retrace your steps and just start backing away from the sugar consumption. But we're given more insulin. And that, it works for a very limited amount of time. And then your body says, hey, things are full. I'm not doing this anymore. So this plays a very critical role in how we get sick. It's the high insulin. The high blood sugar is there, and it's the high insulin. But in what order? The chicken or the egg? So when we're looking at this, this is a slide about metabolic syndrome. And a lot of people ask, what is metabolic syndrome? Okay, metabolic syndrome or syndrome X, you can look it up, but I'm gonna give you a brief definition. It denotes a single variable that causes a constellation of problems. So metabolic syndrome is a single variable that causes a constellation of problems. So most people think that, insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes cannot, I'll say it like this. Insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes cannot cause metabolic syndrome because they are a part of metabolic syndrome. So what I've done here is I've put in categories for you the trigger, what triggers metabolic syndrome, what the symptoms are, and what the condition is. And it's so layered and so complicated. And this is an introduction. I'm not going to go, I can't go deep into it, but I'm going to give you a brief synopsis of how this kind of works. So at the very top, you'll see processed foods and fattening carbs in the trigger category. That consuming those things triggers high blood sugar. We can all agree that those are sugars, and they're going to trigger sugar to be in the blood. That's all high blood sugar is sugar to be in the blood in high amounts. So it triggers high blood sugar. And what happens when a lot of sugar is present in the blood? Insulin, remember, is released by the pancreas because it senses it. Insulin comes in, and your insulin is high in proportion with the amount of sugar that you consume. So insulin sweeps in, and it's trying to dispose of all of that sugar and get it out of the cells. Fructose, you see that as a trigger. Remember, we talked last week about fructose, and fructose is the sugar that's contained in fruits and many processed sugars. Like, for instance, honey. It's like 80% fructose, 20% glucose. Maybe let's say an apple is 55% fructose and then 45% glucose. So what's important to note about fructose is that it's only metabolized by the liver. So you see that arrow that goes to fatty liver, it's only metabolized by the liver. So some other things like, what we showed you earlier, donuts and candy bars, and all of those are high fructose. Anything that says high fructose corn syrup, but also there's many other processed foods that are high fructose. That only gets metabolized by the liver. It doesn't go through the process of this storage. It doesn't go to the liver, to the muscle, to the fat. Remember, this is glycogen storage. What is glycogen storage? Storage for glucose. What is fructose? Fructose is not glucose. It's different. It's a different sugar that gets metabolized by the liver and stored in the liver as fat. Stored in the liver as fat. If you don't use it right away, then it gets stored. So for those that are asking the question about fruit, I'm not villainizing fruit, but let's say you have an apple. It's 20 grams of sugar. 10 of it is fructose, and 10. Let's just make it easy math. 10 of it is fructose. 10 of it is glucose. This apple, the 10 grams of glucose is going to be stored in the liver glycogen. It's going to take up 10 grams of that 100-gram capacity in your liver glycogen stores. And then the other 10 grams, if you don't use it right away, because remember what we said in the first installment of this nutrition series is that fruit is fast sugar. It's fast fuel. It's a simple carbohydrate, meaning it doesn't take much for the body to break it down. So you have consumed fast fuel. If you don't use it, it's going to store. So that fructose is going to store in your liver as fat. And that's one of the ways, because there's other ways, as you can see by this chart. That's one of the ways we get a fatty liver. So people are like, oh, so you're telling me that my fruit consumption is causing me to have a fatty liver? But are you solely eating fruit? No. Many people aren't just solely overeating fruit. They're eating candy and cakes and, fruit snacks and whatever else. They're eating so much more glucose too. So now you have the burden of your glycogen storage overfilling, and then you have the burden of eating too much fructose, and that's a burden to your liver. And remember, your liver has other things to do than just process your overconsumption. So let's go back here and talk about the triggers. So we talked about the processed foods, fattening carbs, that's glucose, which creates high blood sugar, which releases insulin to a high degree and proportion. And so your fructose also creates high blood sugar. And then it also creates a fatty liver. So you see all these arrows moving around. What happens with the high insulin? The high insulin, it creates high blood pressure. How does it create high blood pressure? Well, think about it. And I actually have a video to share. But if you look at your bloodstream, if you had a lot happening in your bloodstream, right? If you had a lot of sugar in your bloodstream, plaque is going to build up on the artery walls and all of that. And it's going to be hard for blood to move through your bloodstream, which creates high blood pressure. There's a force, there's a pressure that your organs are providing to just to circulate. So now you have high blood pressure. That's a symptom. People think that that's actually a condition. It's a symptom to a bigger condition. So you have your high insulin, which remember, insulin being high causes insulin resistance over time. But then again, and then you look at it again, the insulin resistance also causes high insulin. So they impact one another. It's a feedback loop. The insulin resistance makes you gain weight. Why? Because, remember, you filled up your glycogen stores in your liver. It rolls over to fat. So now you're packing on the pounds, right? When you have a fatty liver, that impacts your insulin resistance. Why does that impact your insulin resistance? Because you have impacted the blood sugar again. And the blood sugar impacts the insulin, and the insulin resistance is impacted by the high insulin. See, it's a tangled web we weave. It's a tangled web we weave. And high triglycerides and low HDL, yes, that's a part of it too. But what conditions come out of this? What conditions can we get from this? Well, chief among them, type 2 diabetes. So what is diabetes? What does it translate as? It is high blood sugar and insulin resistance that's chronic. Over time, you have built up insulin resistance, and now you have high blood sugar. Remember this slide. I want you to get this picture in your head of all the sugar that's in your blood that can't go anywhere. It doesn't have anywhere to go other than, fat stores. And then, even then, it's still, because we're still consuming the sugar, like we haven't stopped consuming the sugar. So we dispose of it in the fat, keep eating it. So the bloodstream constantly stays full, and the cells are full, and it's just, there's type 2 diabetes. And then heart disease. We have heart disease. And what happens with heart disease is, remember, when you have high blood pressure, things are having a hard time circulating around. The blood's having a hard time getting oxygen to the brain, getting nutrients places. So then we're having a heart problem and a stroke problem, because if you can't get oxygen to the brain, you could potentially have a stroke. Cancer. A lot of people question the cancer. They question cancer and its relationship to insulin and insulin resistance. Well, and to food in general, and to eating in general. And what I'll say like this is that cancer cells are cells that grow. You have to feed them. And how do we feed all the other cells in our body? How are they fueled? They're fueled by our consumption. So cancer is one of those things that is a condition associated, and there's different types of cancers. But I want you all to write this book down. It's a nephrologist. His name is Dr. Jason Fung. He's a medical doctor. And he wrote this book called The Cancer Code that breaks all of it down and makes that connection between the sugars that we consume, our diet, really just diet, nutrition, and how we arrive at cancer. And I'll have a full disclosure moment here. My mother's sister, my aunt, my mother has 3 sisters, and her oldest sister just recently died from terminal cancer, stage 4 lung cancer. And so what we hate to think is that we were the cause of a disease. And it's really about our lifestyle. And she, her lifestyle produced that kind of cancer. And nobody would argue that fact. But it's really about our lifestyle choices. And it's really hard for us to put fault. We don't want to be the reason. But what I have to say is that it's not your fault. But once you have the information, it is your responsibility to take care of your body. It is your responsibility, because I hear all the time, Sister Kavalya, pray for me. I got this ailment and that ailment, and I'm just thinking to myself, those are choices. Those are choices. Those are lifestyle choices that have been made that have brought upon a condition that you don't necessarily always have to pray away. You could just do something different. And so how we fuel our body is a way that we can do something different, just putting healthy stuff in it. So some of the other conditions, and some of you might be familiar with these, Alzheimer's, which is now classified as the diabetes of the brain. Dementia and Alzheimer's is classified as the diabetes of the brain, the high blood sugar of the brain. Nephropathy, which is the deterioration of kidney function. This is a complication of high insulin and insulin resistance. Neuropathy, which is nerve damage, like a numbness and a tingling in your hands and feet, your limbs. Another complication of diabetes, which is high blood sugar and insulin resistance. Retinopathy, a damage to the blood cells in the retina of your eyes, a complication of diabetes. Atherosclerosis, the plaque in the artery walls obstructing blood flow. Remember the high blood pressure. So conventional medicine treats the condition. Conventional medicine wants to treat the condition, but an alternative approach is to treat the trigger, the root cause. How did it start? How did we get here? And many times we can trace that back to our diet. So what is the symptom of insulin resistance? What does it look like? Here's 27 insulin resistance symptoms. And the reason why I put this on here is because there aren't any lab tests for insulin resistance. There are lab tests for other things, like your fasting glucose, your hemoglobin A1c. There's lab tests for that. But there aren't any lab tests for if you're insulin resistant. And don't you want to catch it, before it becomes a health condition, before it becomes a medical condition? So some of these may surprise people, but you can read them off, but I'm going to point out a few. We already know high blood pressure is on there. Fatty liver, we showed you that. PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome. So infertility issues, and I know people are going to hate to hear this, but infertility issues can be linked to your diet. And why? Why can it be linked to your diet? Because it's a hormonal issue. You have reproductive hormones, just like you have appetite hormones and metabolic hormones. It's all connected. It's a ball of yarn. They're all connected. If one is dysregulated, then it's a domino effect. Other ones are going to be dysregulated to a certain degree. So if you're having infertility, and this isn't infertility issues like, oh, I have a low egg count. I mean, for women, once you've exhausted, your eggs, they're exhausted. You can't grow more eggs. We're talking about other fertility issues, and polycystic ovarian syndrome is one of them. Dark folds and skin tags. I was showing my husband this. He was like, skin tags? Skin tags are associated with insulin resistance? Yes. Dark folds too? Yes, that's telltale sign. I can spot somebody a mile away and see, oh, they have, and I have a picture for you here. So they have dark folds in the back of their neck. You see people that have dark folds in the back of their neck. Or dark patches on their face. And skin tags. Like my family on my dad's side, all of the women on my dad's side are about 300 pounds or more, easily. And I always thought they were moles. So I just, I was like, okay, I'm going to end up having skin tags because all the women have skin tags. And so I just thought they were little moles, and that was just going to be my lot in life. I had skin tags whenever my diet was awful before I went primal. I had skin tags, like right here on my eyes and some on my neck. And when I changed my diet, they went away. So insulin resistance and dark folds and skin tags, they're linked. And you wouldn't believe that in a million years, but I'm telling you, look it up. It's the truth. So some of the other ones that you can see on here, sleep apnea. Like I've had clients that use a CPAP machine, and then after the 12 weeks, they no longer have to use it. I think you heard from Jasmine last week that was her case, that she doesn't use the CPAP machine anymore. She no longer has sleep apnea. Mood. Your mood. Yes, it's all connected because it's a hormonal thing. Remember, there are mood hormones, neurotransmitters that regulate your mood. So it's all connected. And I'm going to mention here, because I mentioned the skin tags in my family. Just because your family has had a particular thing, it's run in your family. I hear this all the time. I have clients that tell me, well, I'm always going to be big because everybody in my family is big. It's like, no. It's something called epigenetics. So there's genetics and there are epigenetics, where you get to determine through your lifestyle how your genes, how your genetic DNA is expressed. You get to determine that. So I'm not 300 pounds, but every woman on my dad's side of the family is 300 pounds or more. I get to choose. I was well on my way, though. I was well on my way if I continued to eat the way that I ate. If I continued that lifestyle, then yes, I was going down that path. But I hate that excuse. Well, everybody in my family has high blood pressure. Well, currently on my mother's side, everybody in my family has high blood pressure, including my mother. I don't, because of my lifestyle choices. So please rid yourself of that excuse that, this is just my lot in life because this is how my family is. That's not true. You get to determine. You get to make that choice through your lifestyle choices, and how you feel your body is 80% of it. It's 80% of it. So if we can just get that right, then, we'd be doing really good. People ask me all the time, what's the diagnosis of diabetes? What does that look like? And I really wanted to show the high blood pressure video for you because it's really good. So I'll see if I can do that with all of our electronics, our lovely technology that we have here. We'll see if it'll allow me to do it. But diabetes, type 2 diabetes, this condition, this disease, how is it diagnosed? So you can know for yourself. Diabetes, again, is high blood sugar that has been chronically elevated over time. We have discovered through this slide here that it's a dietary disease. You can roll back that insulin resistance, that high insulin, that high blood sugar through not consuming sugars and all of its conversions, right, and all of the things that convert to sugar. So what does it look like? So your fasting blood sugar, if it's over 126, if you go get your labs done, if it's over 126, then you would be diagnosed as diabetic. If your hemoglobin A1c is above 6.5, then you would be considered diabetic. What's hemoglobin A1c? Well, it's your blood sugar over the course of 3 months. So it's giving you an average, so to speak, of what your blood sugar is over the course of 3 months. And what's considered normal? So normal is your A1c at 5.3 or less. Your A1c at 5.7 or greater is between 5.7 and 6.4 is pre-diabetic. And then diabetic is when your A1c is above 6.5. So you got 5.3 or lower is normal. 5.7 to 6.4 is pre-diabetic. And 6.5 or above is considered diabetic. So for those of you who are interested in, if you looked at that list of those 27 insulin resistance symptoms, and you were like, man, I have all of these. Maybe you want to get tested. Maybe you want to have your A1c tested to see if you are experiencing diabetes. And what people think is, I'm not fat. I'm not overweight. I'm not severely overweight. I'm not obese, so I can't possibly have type 2 diabetes. That's only for really, really big people. That's not true. So remember, if we go back to last week, it was week 1. We were talking about the waist to hip ratio. The waist to hip ratio being one of the telltale signs, one of the links or associations that with diabetes, with type 2 diabetes. Because what it's saying is that your waist is your stomach, your central abdominal area is protruding out further than your hips. And so when you take your waist to hip ratio, you're essentially dividing whatever your waist is in inches by whatever your hip is in inches. And so if there is central obesity, that means that there's visceral fat. Remember what we said about visceral fat? That's fat that's surrounding organs. If fat is starting to encroach your organs in that space, then there is an association between that and diabetes. Visceral fat and diabetes have a connection, have a link. So don't think for a second because, so-and-so is slim, they call it thin on the outside, fat on the inside. TOFI, I think is the acronym. Thin on the outside, fat on the inside, which means visceral fat. Visceral fat, fatty liver, all of those things is happening on the inside. So don't think, I'm not obese, so that's not me. That doesn't necessarily mean that. I know a number of people that have they look thin, but they do have something happening in their midsection. And that's just one of the signs that you can tell that there may be some diabetes there, and you don't have to be obese to have type 2 diabetes. So when we talk about wellness and health, we have to have a conversation about stress and lack of sleep. So what makes us fat? You're like, how does stress make us, what makes us sick? We're in the what makes us sick week. What makes us sick? Stress and lack of sleep makes us sick? Yeah, it does. And when we talked about, at the very beginning, we talked about body composition and how 80% of your body composition is determined by what you eat, your nutrition. And then 10% is determined by exercise, just 10%. So for those that are saying that, I just need to work out and eat less and work out more, it's only 10%. It's only 10%. It's not about eating less, it's about eating the right things. But anyway, and then your stress management and sleep is the other 10%. It's the other 10%. And why? What does that look like? How can we get sick from being stressed? Like I know that I've been somebody who has been so stressed that it has made me sick. Anybody else out there that, yes, that it literally makes you sick? So what does that look like? And hopefully everybody can see this. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this whole stress response symptom, but what I want you to see is the bottom section the most, is the liver converts liver converts glycogen to glucose. Let's unpack that. So in the wild, if we were a hunter-gatherer in the wild, and because we are hunter-gatherers, our ancestors were hunter-gatherers, think of National Geographic. You're watching National Geographic, and they're documenting the Hadza tribe in Tanzania. These are hunter-gatherers that exist today. And in the wild, if you're being chased by a lion, then that is an acute stress, right? It's not chronic. It's instant. It's an acute stress. And so that's acute stress. And what your body says is, I'm being chased. In response to stress, this is your body saying, I'm being chased by a lion. So I need energy fast. How do I get energy the fastest? Of course, I'm not going to, grab a banana and eat it. No. How do I get energy fast when I'm being chased by a lion? Remember, I have sugar energy. Sugar's energy, right? I have sugar stored in my liver to 100 grams, right? I have that stored in my liver. I'm going to release that back into the bloodstream so that I can use it for energy. So what happens when sugar is released into the bloodstream? Insulin is present. Let's use this one. Insulin is present when sugar is released into the bloodstream, remember? And when sugar is released into the bloodstream and insulin is present, what does insulin tell the body to do? It tells the body not to burn. What are we burning energy for, when we need the energy? What are we burning fat for? When we need all the energy we can get right now because we're running from a lion. So let's translate that into modern day. in modern life, stress is chronic. You have traffic and financial issues and issues with your children and legal problems and the gamut. So if you are stressed, what's happening is cortisol is going to spike your cortisol. What cortisol says is, hey, I'm stressed, I'm being chased by a lion. Your body doesn't know you're not in the wild anymore. So it thinks you're being chased by a lion. It starts to release sugar back into the bloodstream. You're now storing. So if you're stressed all day, you may be in storage mode all day. So you're wondering, I can't lose weight, and you're stressing about that. So you stress about not being able to lose weight, and you're stressing about all these other things that are happening, but stress keeps you in storage mode because it releases sugar into the bloodstream because it thinks you're being chased by a lion, and now you're storing, you're not burning, you can't burn. That is so important to note because that's how we kind of get stuck. We get stuck there with this whole stress response. Now, there are other things there are other responses to stress. Increased heart rate, right? Your heart rate's going to get increased if you're being chased by a lion. Yeah. Your blood pressure is going to increase because you're being chased by a lion. So all of those things make sense. But what I found fascinating in the research was the thing about the cortisol. Cortisol is your stress hormone. In response to stress, it will release. When it releases, it says, hey, there's an emergency here. She's being chased by a lion. Releases sugar from your liver glycogen stores. Once the sugar's in your bloodstream, then insulin's present because it says, hey, sugar in the bloodstream, not supposed to be here. And when insulin's present, you're storing, you're not burning. So that was a huge thing to note. So what's the correlation between stress and sleep? Stress and sleep deprivation, I'll say. Well, let's look at it. Sleep deprivation. There's a number of things that does. It impairs your cognition. You can't think as well. You have higher anxiety. It raises the brain's anticipatory reactions, so it increases your overall anxiety. You're at more of a stroke risk because when you sleep 6 hours or less per night, your chance of stroke increases by 4 times. You have increased risk of diabetes. Why? It's due to the cortisol. What happened with the cortisol? The cortisol released sugar from your liver and got into the bloodstream. Remember that cycle I just shared with you. A single night of sleep deprivation increases your cortisol levels by more than 100%. By the next evening, cortisol is still 37 to 45% higher. So research has also shown that compromised sleeping patterns and sleeping 5 or less hours per night is associated with 3.7-fold greater odds of obesity among men and 2.3-fold increase among women compared to those that sleep 7 to 8 hours per night. That's huge. So for those that think that sleep doesn't matter, it really does. It increases your symptoms of depression because lack of sleep disrupts the neurotransmitters that regulate your mood. Increased risk of cancer. Yeah, for breast cancer specifically, because decreased melatonin. Melatonin is the hormone that's released in response to it being nighttime. It says, hey, it's nighttime out. It's time to go to bed. It's like your circadian rhythm. Your circadian rhythm, technically speaking, we're supposed to wake up when the sun comes up, and we're supposed to go to bed when the sun sets. But does that happen? Because think about in the wintertime, the sun sets at like 4 p.m. We're not going to bed at 4 p.m. But anyway, melatonin is released in response to nighttime, in response to darkness. So decreased melatonin, which if you're lacking sleep, so decreased melatonin disrupts your estrogen production, so causing you to be more susceptible to breast cancers because of the estrogen. Estrogen's a hormone. We're back at hormones. Because of the estrogen dysregulation. It's a hormonal dysregulation, a hormonal imbalance. Increased risk of heart disease. Blood pressure decreases when you sleep. So if you aren't getting much sleep, it'll stay higher. And that'll cause problems with blood flow with your blood pressure. Weight gain. Sleep helps balance hormones that make you feel hungry and full. Remember, leptin and ghrelin. We talked about those three metabolic hormones. We talked about when you feel full and when you feel hungry. Those are all hormonal functions. So we've covered a lot of material as it relates to how we get sick. And stress is a part of it. Sleep deprivation is a part of it. And what we put in our bodies is a major part of it. This is really just skimming the surface. Really, it's about you doing the due diligence and being a citizen scientist and researching all of this for yourself. What I will say is that it is not your fault. But once you're armed with the information, it is your responsibility. It just is your responsibility. It's for you to do the best you can with the temple that God has given you, and you to honor it, and you to put healthy stuff in it, and it'll function for you. It'll function for you. So, at the end of last week, I had a special guest, and at the end of this week, I have a special guest. And she was a client of mine, and she rocked it out and did an amazing job, lost a lot of weight, but totally changed her life. She has a story to tell, a testimony that's very real and authentic. And I want her to come up now. Miss Akia Isom. Hello. Your mic is right there, and I will move over so you can come on this stage with me. So, everybody, if you can welcome Akia to the stage. Hello.
Hello.
How are you? Is the mic on?
I think so. No, maybe not. No, it is, I think. The light's on.
Are we good?
Hello.
There we go.
There we go.
So, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. Akia is going to share a little bit of her testimony. I'm going to ask some questions, too, I'm going to ask some questions as she goes on, but she's going to share some of her testimony as it relates to how she lost weight, what were some of the hardest parts, what were some of the benefits, and how, and in reality, how things are working for you now. And I'll hand it over.
Wow, what a loaded question. So I am one of Kavalya's clients that did have gastric bypass in 2007. So I had gastric bypass in 2007. I was like 19 and like 5'2" and like 250, something like that. Totally, completely unhealthy. Then, you struggle with weight, you keep it down, you go back up, you have kids after, all of that kind of stuff. And I had back-to-back pregnancies and found myself like Christmas of 2018, crying that like, oh my gosh, I weigh 249 again. Like, what happened? And being 5'2", 249 is not even close to, where I should be. So I decided that I was going to finish nursing my child that was about 9 months. I was going to nurse her to a year, and then I was going to work on my body and get my body back in alignment. So I spent a year and a half trying trainers and going to like 6-week, heat challenge type stuff where you were working out twice a day and eating all these carbs and all of this like regulated stuff. And I lost 40 pounds in a year and a half, which was great. But I was frustrated, I was angry, I was tired, and it just wasn't working. Like, it wasn't happening fast enough. And I had this moment where I was like crying in my car, and I'm like, God, like I had just done another like six-week challenge and had lost like 3 pounds. And I was just like, this is not it. Like, I can't keep doing this. I'm frustrated, I'm yelling, like it's not good for me. God, what am I supposed to do? And he was like, call Kavalya. And I was like, really? I don't even know her like that. Her plan looks really strict. Yeah, I'm good. And I was like, I'll find something else. So I started talking to somebody else. And then the Holy Spirit was like, call Kavalya. I'm like, okay, fine, God, I'm gonna listen. So I texted her and said, hey, will you take me on as a client? And so she did. And in 4 months, I lost 41 pounds. So what took me a year and a half took 4 months with Kavalya and really shifted and changed a lot of things in my life. And so I started with her in November of 2020 and ended with her in, what was that, March? Yeah, like March of 2021, November to like March, somewhere around there, February. So in that time, I learned a lot of things. I also started running around 2020. I enjoy working out. It's kind of my stress relief. And I let people convince me, contrary to Kavalya's knowledge that I learned, that going back to a healthier version of the standard American diet would help me. And so I did that in preparation for running a marathon. And in that time, gained back about 17, 18 pounds. And so now I am working on getting back fat adapted, back on primal, so that I can lose back some of the weight that I gained. Though I will say I still fit my size 8 jeans. So I'm gonna rock these size 8 jeans, and that my goal with Kavalya was to get below 170. And when we finished, I think I started with her at 205, and when we finished, I think I was like 166, somewhere around there. And right now I'm sitting like right at 180, which is not where I want to be. And so yeah, soon enough it'll come off because I'm eating back primal.
So I just want to say that I am not selling myself or a program. I'm selling a science-based approach to nutrition. That's what I'm selling. I don't coach anymore. So it's just a science-based approach to nutrition. That's why I'm doing these classes. But what has been the hardest part for you? What was the hardest part for you when you were going through the program? And what's the hardest part for you now that you're trying to get back?
I think the hardest part for me in the beginning, I don't think it was hard because I was just like determined. I was like, I am determined to do this. I'm going to do this. It's not an issue. I did have problems when I went to visit my family. Because, when you get back around family, you get back into old habits, and there's like all these sweets, and you're like off, and you're like, ooh, there's chips, and there's all this stuff that you can't get. So I did have problems around my family, and it was the holidays, like Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's. And so I had to talk with you, and you were like, okay, let's do the tablespoon method. And so I did. So I had a tablespoon of mac and cheese, and I had a tablespoon of mashed potatoes, and I ate some cake and cookies and stuff that I wasn't supposed to. And those weeks were not as good, but that I had struggles then with the sugar. Now getting back on track, it's the same issue. It's realizing that sugar is addictive, and that when you are indulging in something that's addictive. And I think the worst thing about sugar for me is the knowledge that like once you eat a little bit, like you think like, okay, I'm just gonna have this one little piece of sugar. And then all of a sudden, now all I crave is sugar. And if you pay attention to it, like when you're trying to do good, you realize how much that sugar tries to control, and that desire for sugar tries to control you. And so this time I'm just really being cognizant of like, this is an addiction, and it's putting toxin in your body, and do you really want to make that choice to add this toxicity into your body? And so that's kind of what I'm really trying to be cognizant of this time. But yeah, sugar is hard for me, and sugar is in everything.
It's in everything. Yeah. And it's engineered for you to crave it. So when you say, oh, I'll just have a piece, it doesn't work like that, because it's formulated for you not to just have one piece. Like the tagline, can't eat just one, is a thing for a reason. You can't. It's so abstaining from it, and I get a lot of heat for the abstinence thing. It's like abstaining from it is going to be your best bet, because you don't get to control the hijacking, the exploitation of your brain chemistry. You don't get to control it. Once you consume it, you don't have much control over it. So abstaining from it was really helpful for me. And so I really advocate abstaining. Moderation doesn't really work because of how it's formulated. And moderation definitely doesn't work if you're trying to lose weight and you are over-consuming. Like you think, oh, this is moderation, I'm just gonna have some ice cream once every evening. That's not moderation. Moderation is not that. So what have you, do you want to share any tips or anything that you, just insight or tips that to help people along that might be struggling in the same way with sugar or struggling with their weight, things that you've learned?
One, I've learned that it really is worth it. Like, as soon as I started gaining weight back, it all, of course it went right to my midsection. And that's what weight does. And it's just ugly. Really, why'd you go right to my midsection? But also, I felt differently. When I was on the plan and eating like I was supposed to and following Primal, I had more energy, I was doing better. And I think the truth is in the science. I realized, as I was listening to all of these people tell me that, oh, you'll run better if you eat carbs, and you need carbs, and you need carbs, especially if you like to work out and like to be active, I realized that my fastest time running a half marathon was while I was on the plan. That's not true. The science, what people say didn't show in the way that my body performed. So it wasn't true. And I think the other thing is just don't get off track. I mean, it is difficult and it is different in our society because we're inundated with everything saying oh, eat carbs and balance your carbs and figure it out. But nobody can really figure it out because you don't really need them. And so I think I really had to challenge myself to say, you don't really need it. And every time that you try to say, oh, well, I'm just going to have this little bit, or I'm just going to have this little bit, it just starts a roller coaster. So just don't get on. Don't get on the ride. Eat the foods that you need to eat, and it will make you better. And one of the things that I also didn't share was I was pre-diabetic. When I started, even halfway in, having lost 40 pounds, my A1c was still 5.7. Which is right at that pre-diabetic. And when I finished with the Primal, the 12 weeks of the Primal, my A1C was 5.2. So, and my A1C today was still 5.2. So that's good. I'm trying to, keep those things in order, but it really does change the way that your body functions, the way that your body works. And when you realize oh, my body can function better, I can feel better and live better. And that was the one thing, it's not even the 15 pounds, because most of the time when you gain 15 pounds, people don't really, really notice. But it's also the way that I feel. I felt a lot better when I was eating better than I do when I eat junk. And so then you realize it's not really worth it. And if you'll give your body a try and do 12 weeks of eating right, you'll feel oh my gosh, everything is so much different and so much better. Why would I ever stop doing that? And that's what I say to myself now. Why did you ever stop doing that? So.
And I say all the time, I was you gotta, for what this installment is about is what makes us sick. And what makes us sick, we in order to heal whatever our ailments, the conditions that we talked about today, you just need to get out of the way. You're in the way. Just get out of the way and your body will do it. If you feed it the proper things, it'll help you. It'll reverse it. It will take time. You didn't become, 300 pounds overnight. So you expecting to be 150 pounds overnight is unrealistic. You didn't get diabetes overnight. Remember, that's chronic. That's a chronic high blood sugar and high insulin and insulin resistance. It's chronic. So, you're going to have to backtrack, and it's going to take some time. But if you're just consistent and get out of the way, then it'll happen. It'll happen. You can heal yourself in many ways, in many regards, just by focusing on your nutrition. I want you to stay up here and do some Q&A with me. Okay. Anybody have any questions?
Essentially, I eat, I do bacon and eggs every morning. I boil eggs, for the week and eat bacon and boiled eggs, bacon with no sugar.
Right.
I do a lot of, tuna is quick, and because my life is busy, I do a lot of tuna with measuring, a little bit of a Primal mayo in that tuna, and they have a Chipotle one that has a lot of flavor. Huh? No, it's Primal mayonnaise, so it's really made with avocado oil, not advertised as avocado oil and having a bunch of other stuff in it. So I'll do a tablespoon of that to portion with, I do a lot more mustard than mayo just because it's a little bit better for you. And then, so I eat a lot of tuna, and then for dinner, meat and vegetables, air fried chicken, steak, a lot of other meats. Like there's a lot of variety you can
Right.
do. And I do eat, crazy enough, I eat a lot of burgers. I do a lot, like obviously lettuce wrap burgers, but I do a lot of like, because it's easy, you can take chicken or turkey or beef. I prefer chicken and turkey, but you can prepare, just handmade patties, and then it's easy for when you need something to just, cook them real quick, and then you wrap it in, lettuce and add bacon and mustard.
Yeah. I mean, if you can eat bacon,
I don't really do portion control. I just make sure that I'm eating the right stuff, because if you eat the right stuff, you'll feel full and you don't really need to portion control. Like I never really had to portion control while I was like in other diets, you have to portion control. But while I was doing primal, you never have to portion control, because you eat your meat, you eat your vegetables, you eat when you're hungry, you stop when you're full, and you're good.
And the reason for that is because, remember, we talked about satiety hormones. You have satiety hormones for protein. You have satiety hormones for fats. So your body will tell you, hey, I've had enough. I'm done. I don't need any more. And so listening to your body, eating when you're hungry, stopping when you're full, is your body telling you, hey, I need nutrients. That's why you're eating. And hey, I don't need any more. And so it's really simple if you think about it. It's really simple, the process, but no portion control. We weren't weighing, we weren't measuring. There were certain things that I was like, yeah, weigh that out. But that's not sustainable over a lifetime. It was because she was trying to lose weight. She had a particular goal. Then the instructions were, okay, we need to manage how much fat you eat. Fat's not bad when you're eating, because it's an essential macronutrient. Remember, you have to consume those. You have to consume dietary fat. You have to consume dietary protein. But when you're losing weight, remember, she mentioned fat adaptation or keto adaptation. When we talked about a ketogenic style of eating, we talked about ketosis, which is the state of your body burning body fat for fuel. If you're trying to burn body fat for fuel, then you need to consume less dietary fat, because the dietary fat is considered a fuel source. So you want to burn more of this, you're going to have to eat a little less of the things that are considered a fuel source. What are the fuel sources? It's going to be your sugars, your carbohydrates, and your fats. Fats are essential, yes, but they're also a source of fuel. So if you wanted me to give you a number, then I would give you a range. If you were just dying to weigh and measure and count macros and all that, then I would give you a range of 35 to 75 grams of fat. If you're trying to lose weight, you're going to be on the lower end of that spectrum. If you're talking to me about proteins and you just have to have a number, well, it would be 0.8 grams of protein to 1 gram of protein of your desired body weight, not your current body weight. People get that wrong all the time, and it drives me nuts. It's like you are eating not to maintain the 300-pound body that you have. You are eating to fuel the desired body weight, the body that you want to be, not the body that you are. If you're feeding and fueling the body that you are, you're going to maintain the body that you are. So if you have to just weigh and measure, then I would tell you 0.8 grams to 1 gram of protein per pound of desired body weight. So yes, that's what I would say. So your fats and your proteins, I gave you some numbers that kind of got you covered, but you don't really have to weigh and measure. Just listen to your body. If you get out of the way and just listen to it, really, there's a difference between hunger and appetite. So just eating when you're hungry and not when you just have a taste for something. I just have a taste for something. Not when you just have a taste for something. Then, you'll stay in the safe zone. She also did, you had a fasting regimen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You had a fasting regimen, like intermittent fasting. Were you doing the 16-8?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, right now she just gave you 3 meals that she consumes in a day. The key to intermittent fasting is you don't just jump right into intermittent fasting. Like, everybody just wants to start fasting. It's like you have to adapt first. You have to adapt to using body fat as fuel, as a fuel source. And then you can not eat for long. Fasting is not eating. Then you cannot eat for a period of time, and your body will tap into your body fat fuel, your reserves, your food energy reserves, and use that for fuel. If you're not fat adapted, like if you have not adapted to burning body fat for fuel, then it's going to be very, very challenging. And what is it going to do? It's going to cause stress. And what does stress do? We saw today what stress does. It, increases your glucose in the blood and keeps you in storage mode. So don't just go out guns a-blazing with the intermittent fasting and all that. Get adapted first. Adapt to using body fat for fuel through removing the other fuel source of carbohydrates. And then once you've adapted and it's no longer just eating when you're hungry, stopping when you're full, is no longer producing the result that you want, meaning you're not losing weight anymore, then employ a protocol. The protocol is intermittent fasting. You employ that protocol. And it's a very natural way of, once you go primal, and you'll notice this, it kind of comes natural. You're just not hungry. You're just not as hungry. Yeah. So it's a natural transition into intermittent fasting. And that's what you want. You don't want to be like, oh, I'm starving. I can't wait till, 5 o'clock. I can't wait. You don't want to do that because that's a stressor. So get adapted first to this style of eating and then employ a protocol of intermittent fasting. That can look like a 16-8 protocol, which means that you fast for 16 hours in a day and then you have an eating window of 8 hours in a day. Or some people do OMAD, which is 1 meal a day. That's the acronym, 1 meal a day, because they're only hungry once a day. And some people do 2MAD, which is 2 meals a day. So, but first adapt yourself so it's not so stressful on you. And then you can employ an intermittent fasting protocol. But eating when you're hungry, stopping when you're full, just listening to your body's cues. Anybody else have questions? Yes, ma'am. So, and I don't have this slide up, but we're going to talk about it a ton next week because that's how that installment is how to burn fat. But fat adaptation is, remember in the first week I was telling you about sugar burners and fat burners and then people that are metabolically flexible. So it takes about 12 weeks. That's why the program was 12 weeks. It takes about 12 weeks for your body to adapt to efficiently burning body fat for fuel. If you don't eat for 8 hours, you are going to burn body fat. You will. But when I say efficiently burn it, like your body knows, oh, I no longer have sugar as a fuel source. I need to burn this like it's going out of style. It's a consistent stream of energy. I need to just keep burning this. That's what fat adaptation is. You have abstained from the other fuel source, sugar, carbohydrates, it takes about 9 to 12 weeks to become fat adapted. You abstain for that period, bless you. You abstain for that period, and then your body is most efficiently burning body fat for fuel. When you become metabolically flexible is when you are fat adapted for a really long time, and you've gotten, you've essentially got rid of a lot of your body fat. And so people that are really fit, they're metabolically flexible. Why? They have a greater capacity for sugar, because what do they have? They have muscle glycogen that fit people have more muscle. And more muscle means more glycogen storage capacity, so you have more places to put sugar. And so they're a little more metabolically flexible. They can have a little sugar and it's not gonna kick them out of being fat adapted. They can switch the fuel source depending upon what's coming in. So that's the sweet spot. It takes a nice bit of time to get there, but if you've gotten to being fat adapted, you're halfway there. You know what I mean? Yep.
But so then you also mentioned one slide I saw about lean protein. That they always tell us lean protein are enough meat.
Yeah. So that was last week. We talked about lean protein. And the thing about lean protein is that because it doesn't have the fat remember, fat doesn't have an insulinogenic response. It's a negligible response. Remember, insulin is the storage hormone. So if fat doesn't cause an insulinogenic response, meaning to store, then the fat content in the protein is going to neutralize the protein a bit to make it less of a spike when you consume it. When you have lean proteins, there's like, a chicken breast, for instance, 99% protein. So you have very little fat there to neutralize and offset the insulin response. So you're going to eat that lean protein, your blood sugar is it's not going to spike like you would if carbohydrates, right? But it is going to be higher than if you had a protein that was more fatty to neutralize, again, the insulin response. So where lean protein is appropriate is when you've gotten to a place where you're metabolically flexible and you've reached your goal weight, your body doesn't have a ton of excess, fat, and then you can start eating, and you've regulated your hormones. Once you get to the place where you regulate your hormones, then you can start eating. I won't say don't eat lean protein. I'm just saying what's going to happen if you do. Eating lean protein is best fit for when you're more metabolically regulated. So that's why you see all the bodybuilders, like they're all eating chicken breasts and drinking egg whites and all that kind of stuff. They're more metabolically regulated. Yeah. Yeah. Does it make sense? Okay. Anybody else? Yes, sir. Yes. Mm-hmm.
So if somebody's dealing with chronic pain, daily, is their body storing?
You're in an inflamed state, right? It's inflammation. Inflammation does trigger stress hormones, the stress response, and a cascade of other hormonal issues. And so how it impacts your weight gain or being in storage mode, it definitely can. It does for me. I'll tell you that right now. It does for me. If I'm highly stressed for a long period of time, then I'll be in storage mode even when I'm not eating. And even when I'm fasting. And sometimes fasting is a stressor. Like your body's like, hey, you constantly eat sugar, and then all of a sudden you stop eating. Like people that go on the Daniel fast when we have to, they binge, for weeks prior to the Daniel fast, and they go on the Daniel fast, and it's like, I didn't lose any weight on the Daniel fast. It's like, because, anyway. But yes, it definitely does. Have you been feeling that? Have you been feeling like you're not doing anything different as it relates to your diet, but you seem to be holding weight or gaining weight? Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Like that has happened to me. The stress has caused me to be in storage mode. Yeah. Yeah. Anybody else? So, yes, I love Dr. Jason Fung. He's a nephrologist. He's a medical doctor. A lot of people think that the doctors that talk about this alternative primal approach are quacks, and they're not actually legit doctors. But that's not the case. I give you one doctor, Dr. Robert Lustig. He wrote the book Hacking the American Mind. Salt, sugar, fat was Michael Moss. He's not a doctor, but there's some really good information in there. But Dr. Jason Fung is a nephrologist, which is a kidney specialist. It's a medical doctor that's a kidney specialist. And what in his research and trying to treat people that had kidney disease, he was like, it's not adding up. It's not adding up. And he started barking up the tree of sugar and obesity and how all of that played into kidney failure. And I showed you it has a very direct correlation. So he has books that are brilliant, that are really brilliant. He makes it very easy to understand. The books are, he has the cancer code. So he talks about how we get cancer through, our lifestyle choices, nutrition and such. The obesity code. Absolutely amazing book. Like you'll have so many aha moments. The whole book will be highlighted. The diabetes code, because there's obesity and there's diabetes. They're different. And then and the complete guide to fasting is pretty brilliant as well. But he runs a clinic in Canada for obese people, and it's a clinic for fasting their way out of their health conditions. And again, he's a nephrologist, which is a kidney specialist who is, yes, a medical doctor that's not a quack. Fung, F-U-N-G, Jason Fung. And so he has 1 million YouTube videos that if you want, you just want it in tidbits like 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there, he has 1 million videos, and he makes it so easy to understand, and you'll be like, yes, this makes sense. Finally, something that makes sense. So, yeah. Anybody else? Well, thank you all for being here. Thank you for sharing your story. You were so transparent, and you were a rock star. You rocked that program, and I'm looking forward to seeing what's next for you, because when you set your mind to something, you got it.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and so glad to be here, and so glad for all of the knowledge that has been life-changing that I'll still apply.
Yay! Thank you. Thank you, everybody online, for being here. This was our week 3 of our nutrition series, What Makes Us Sick. There's more to it. We just skimmed the surface, but hopefully you found, hopefully it was enlightening, and it gives you, just a little information for you to go and be a citizen scientist and learn more on your own. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you next week, which is week 4, How to Burn Fat and Live Well. Good night.